Well, hello, welcome once again to Pale Blooms and Beyond. Thank you for joining us today. Paul Trynka is an English rock journalist and author. Paul was the editor of Mojo from 1999 to 2003, editorial director of Q, and editor of International Musician. He has written for publications such as The Independent, Classic Rock Magazine, The Guardian, Elle and Blueprint, as well as authoring several books on biographies of music icons such as Iggy Pop, David Bowie, and Brian Jones. But prior to his work in journalism, Paul was a singer in post-punk band Nyam Nyam. The band issued several singles, an EP, and the album Hope of Heaven during the period 1981 to 1985. In 1988, Paul, with fellow ex-Nyam Nyam member Trevor Simpson, regrouped as Horseland and issued a single. In 2012, LTM Recordings remastered and reissued the album, along with most of the singles, along with a new recording, Doubt. Well, welcome, Paul.
Hi, thank you, Greg. It's great to be here.
Well, take us back to the beginning. Where were you born?
I was born in near Hull in Yorkshire, in the north of England. I was actually born in a little town outside, but I lived most of my life in Hull itself, or at least until I left for London.
Okay, okay. How about, do you have any fond childhood memories? Did you remember hearing music in the household growing up?
Um, I think music was the one kind of beacon of, I don't know, hope or whatever when I grew up. So my sister was very into music, and she'd have records by the Beatles and the Stones and the Animals. So I listened to those a lot when I was a kid, and I was probably a big Animals fan until at least until I was 16 or 17 and first playing in bands. And yeah, I mean, she liked Dylan and lots of people. So she'd be bringing records home. So I guess the first records I bought were probably fairly awful, late Beatles singles, the sort of John Lennon and Mind Games, those sorts
Yeah,
of things.
yeah.
But it was definitely, Hull's a small place. It's quite isolated. There's not a lot of people moving in or out. So music was definitely something that called from far away and let you think there are other possibilities out there.
Right, right. Well, yeah, it's good to have an elder sibling too to help influence you. Like you said, bring those records home. What is the age difference between the two?
I think she's probably about 6 years older than I am.
Okay.
But she was great. And in fact, with my first punk band, which is called Mental Block, she helped find the clothes. Because, of course, if you're in Hull in 1976 and 1977, and my friend Nick and I were in a punk band really early on, you can't get any of those clothes. You can't even get trousers that aren't flares. You've
Yeah.
got to go to women's shops to try and find something, then you've got to alter them. So my sister made me some great outfits, a really cool kind of leopard skin top. Wonder who that was influenced by, and yeah, so it was great. And she
Yeah.
wasn't really into punk, but if I state, when we were finally playing in clubs in Hull in 1976 and 1977, and sometimes we were quite rough. She lived in the centre of town. By then, my parents had moved out of the centre of town, so I could stay overnight. So definitely having a supportive sibling was a big thing, I think.
Yeah. Speaking of flared trousers, I ran across a picture of Bay City Rollers and and those pants they had. Oh man, I almost posted a comment said, "Where can I get me some pants like that?" Uh, well, did you ever learn to play any instrument at all?
Yeah, I mean, I took piano lessons when I was a kid, and I probably got my first guitar about 1971 or something. I think my parents got me a few guitar lessons from a young woman who played folky stuff and probably, oh, I don't know, probably hymns or something.
Okay.
So she showed me a few chords, and then it just went on from there where you'd listen to records and figure stuff out. So I played, piano and guitar that I play now, right, from quite a young age, really.
Okay, okay. Well, how about some artists and musicians you started getting into as like a teen?
Well, we mentioned the animals,
Yeah.
um, all that Lennon stuff. Like especially John Lennon and Placido Ono Band was a great, really good record. But by the time I was 14 or 15 in sort of 74, 75, 76, I was getting very disenchanted with the music scene. And I had a friend at school called Nick, and we just searched out stuff between us. So I do remember really early on, we had the Bowie Santa Monica bootleg.
Okay.
He had it. He just had a bit more in pocket money than I did, so I think he bought it. And there was a hippie head shop round the corner from our school, and they would have cool records. And I do remember they had Hey Joe really early on, like 1975.
Uh,
So therefore, we were lucky. We got into this stuff really early on. I mean, in Britain, you had kind of pub rock,
right.
which was good. I mean, I'm not sure when Dr. Feelgood got going, but you'd be listening to that because it was a bit more stripped down. Again, I was not really into the flowery stuff. I wanted something that was just simpler because things had got a bit too baroque. And yeah, so that Patti Smith, Horses, came later. I think that was the end of 75. But again, we had that really early on. I think with Hey Joe, I remember thinking, oh, there's a guitarist out. Oh, he's supposedly called Tom Verlaine. He's named after this poet. He was Patti's lover. So it was very romantic, very exciting. And then I think in that shop as well, we heard the Ramones' first album when it came out in the States. I think they got it on import. So I remember having Blitzkrieg Bop, I think, as an import early, right at the beginning. I didn't have many records because I couldn't afford very many, but would get singles, and occasionally that shop would get them through. But mostly it would just be the kind of hippie dudes getting it for themselves. And then there was another pretty good shop called Sydney Scarborough that's locally famous in Hull. It was under the City Hall, where they later on by 1976 they're getting all this stuff. So
Oh,
if you wanted Spiral Scratch by the Buzzcocks, they had it, the EP. So I think I probably had 50 pence pocket money per week, and I think a single was 50 pence. And under my bed now, the main vinyl I've got are just, one single a week, right all the way through from 76 to 77, 78. So it's taking you from the Hot Rods, and then the Damned, and then the Sex Pistols onto the Buzzcocks, and then Magazine, and Teardrop Explodes later, the Only Ones, people like that. And of course, over the same period, we also were checking out a fair bit of Bowie, but I think definitely it was Iggy and Lou Reed. So between us, between my friend Nick and I, we bought all the Stooges and Iggy albums, and probably most of the Lou Reed ones, obviously Transformer and Berlin. So yeah, things like Berlin, all those grim stories were what enlivened my teenage years.
right. So you were drawn to that New York sound too. You mentioned that. Yes, a lot of those bands coming out of New York. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, you mentioned the Hot Rods, Eddie and the Hot Rods. I just talked with Graham Douglas.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, and he was in Kershaw Flyers and Eddie and the Hot Rods. So yeah, I've hit on Brinsley Schwartz. I've hit on a few of those pub rock.
Mm, mm.
Talked to those guys.
Yeah, I
Well,
mean, I like that music, but a lot of it tends to be blues forms. And I think
yeah,
also when you're a kid, you're very, very purist and sort of arrogant. So,
yeah,
and I know now that with Iggy when he had a band, he didn't want to play blues stuff because he thought, what's the point? And of course, as a kid, I'd listened to that blues stuff and I played quite a lot of it. Then ultimately, what's the point of just copying it? So therefore, we were, there's almost a religious zealotry about not having anything that was 12 bar in. So whilst I liked taking the hot rods, it's like teenage depression. Yeah, it's pretty good. It's teenage depression, but it goes, to the third chord, then it gets the fifth and the fourth. I don't like at the end. It's a bit of a 12 bar, but it was good stuff and it was inspiring as well. And definitely you would seek out in the UK, you'd seek out these programs that not many people saw, but they'd be here and they'd be there. There would be these little strange programs from Hull or from Manchester or whatever. So bit by bit, something was really starting to build and get
Oh,
exciting.
okay, I was going to ask you about that. Hull being a smaller city, was there a scene starting to develop there though?
Um, the punk and post-punk stuff came later, so uh, there were a bunch of guys in a little resort called Hornsea who were in bands probably early on. And then my friend Nick and I had what was definitely Hull's first punk band called Mental Block. So that was the end of 76. I think we first played right at the end of 76. Then we played right through 77. And but but by the time I remember bumping into kids, there's a future friend of mine called Paul Moller, where you'd bump into him in Sydney Scar because he had a leather jacket on, and you'd go, who are you? What's that? Are you in a band? Are you playing?" So suddenly, quite a lot of people from different places were turning up, and there'd always been quite a decent live scene. There was a big club called the Welly Club that still is sort of well known now. And, that was around. And so I think you got to remember as well that there were people into the Pink Fairies and
Yeah,
that kind of stuff and Hawkwind. And
yeah,
even if you were a punk, you didn't really object to that too much. I mean, you sort of hated some hippies and then not some of them, so it was, you know, it was quite subtle. There were tribal divisions, but you'd have allies of convenience.
right.
So yeah, there was a scene starting to build. So by the time I was on to my second band, that was not as good as Mental Block, called No Label, because I wanted to. I don't. I always thought that I was chucked out, but then the singer then reminded me that I'd left. I was like, oh yeah. So I'd had a bit of a grudge against him all these years and realized I was wrong. And so yeah, by 78 there was a lot of stuff happening, and then and 79 as well. So in the early days you'd travel a long way in 1977. So you'd have to go to shows in Huddersfield to see people like Generation X or whatever. And my friend Nick and I also went to the Sci-Fi Festival, which is quite celebrated. That's one where
Okay.
Joy Division played. It was the first Public Image show as well. So you would travel, and there was definitely this kind of telegraph, underground telegraph. Like with Mental Block, we were friends with Penetration. My friend Nick would call that Malcolm McLaren every couple of weeks. And
Okay.
then I'd call Lee Childers every couple of weeks. And I'd forgotten until I just checked some diaries. So to try and get gigs, hey, we've got this punk band. They were always very nice, but they weren't going to give any gigs to, 15 and 16-year-olds. But there was this, definitely you were talking to different people and they were telling you about different studios. There was a cool York was another local centre. Later on, we'd all go and play out there. In fact, with Mental Block, my punk band, we played out there as well. They had a really cool clothes shop, and they had something called Red Rhino Records. And Red Rhino were really important again. So they would start to distribute singles and albums if you put them out independently. So we'd get stuff that was distributed by them. Then later on, when you're getting to the point of putting out your own records, you'd call them first, and they would take 500 copies or 1,000 copies. So it was just building it very slowly. But it was so there weren't many people around. I mean, when Nick and I went to see the Heartbreakers, and they were touring in place of the Anarchy tour because they'd been banned, there were maybe four people who had short hair, and you'd all go and chat to each other and go, "Whoa, hey, hang on, what's happening here?" And then, but then, literally by the summer of 77, there were loads of punks because it'd been in the Sun or whoever. But really early on, it was very exciting, and that you'd still be communicating with those people, months later. So yeah, it's strange. It was a very small scene, but you never had any doubt that it was going to take off. It was weird.
Yeah, yeah. Well, with Mental Block, did you have any demos or any material that you
We had a few songs of our own. So I mean, we did
yeah.
literally have it was like the Ramones songbooks. We played Blitzkrieg Bop, and then we played Search and
All right.
Destroy. We did, Now I Want to Be a Dog. Then we'd have a few songs. Did we do any? Yeah, we do Waiting for the Man, of course. And then we had quite a few songs of our own, or even ones that other musicians had got from locally that we'd rip off. So yeah, I started writing songs, and we did do quite a few demos, but we had no idea how to record, no idea really with a. Also, I had what was a kind of a Marshall stack. It was called Park, and it sounded outrageous. but only at the noise level of a low-flying Vulcan bomber. So you just couldn't get a decent sound in the studio. So you'd use a fuzz box, which sounded wrong, so that we did do little demos in a place in a terrace block right in the middle of Hull, where it's a big sort of student area. So we were making demos, and but they didn't go anywhere. The demos were mainly to try and get gigs. But we would do local gigs. We Summer of '77 we played at a big comprehensive school, in the open air. That was really exciting with some sort of terrible hippie band, blues band, supporting us, and they're like, "Who are you?" Of course, we thought, "Well, you're rubbish. We're better than you." And the kids liked us. It was great. It was a very exciting time because there wasn't much else going on in Hull, really. Yeah. So bit by bit, it was definitely a real beacon of hope in a town that I personally found quite depressing.
Okay. Well, fast forward up. How did talk about how Nyam Nyam formed, how you guys got together, and where the name came from.
Um, we got together really because I had a Trevor, who's the bassist. Trevor Simpson was a school friend, so he'd
Yeah.
been at the same school as me, and he was playing drums. And so, we just liked each other. He had really good taste in music, although he did take quite a long time to get rid of the double denim. But yeah, he had good taste in music. So I think I just persuaded him to play bass. Why don't you play bass? So then we'd go and jam round at each other's place, even while I had my second band, who were called No Label, who were a bit more sort of, I don't know, almost power poppy, really. Um, and just because we didn't really know how to write songs yet. And so with Trevor, we just would go and jam and be doing stuff together. And then by that time, we were going very regularly to the Welly Club. And so with our friends, we just looked around for a drummer, and our first drummer was called Dave Jones. He was great, but again, he'd pretty much learned to play drums. So so the band could happen. So and in fact, it was Dave who named the band because we were rehearsing in a little village hall. We had some gig coming up at another little village hall. We had a name, and he was reading Nausea by Jean-Paul Sartre. And this is obviously 1979, as you can tell, because everybody was reading Nausea in 1979. And he went, and he just read out a line. He said, "I'm going to open a page, and then we're going to choose a name from that page." And on that page, it said something about the Jungle Warriors of Nyam Nyam. So we went, "Nyam Nyam, fine, I'll do." And that was it.
And that was it. Okay.
Yeah.
But that's you know, that's sometimes better way to pick a name than out of the air. So,
I, it
so
was said later on, "Oh God, everybody's doing it because you had Duran Duran and you had other people,
yeah,
whatever."
double
But I
name.
don't think we'd ever really heard of. I mean, maybe they were going by then. I don't know. And there's another band called Table, who I didn't really find out about till later. And we didn't really sort of care. But yeah, that Jean-Paul Sartre inspired us, and how are you gonna, how are you gonna ignore that summons from the great existentialist?
Right. Well, did all the members share similar taste and musical influences?
I think very much so, yes. So there would have been some, variety in the Venn diagram, but a lot of it overlapped. And
Yeah.
so we were all very rigorous. Dave was a very good drummer, and he was also very fussy as well. So he was definitely into Joy Division. And so the moment we had anything that was a little bit conventional or a little bit, I don't know, some little Beatley chord, he'd really tell you off, So he was another real purist.
Yeah.
Sadly, he was a purist about his own drumming, and so we'd have terrible gigs. And there was one we played at the Floral Hall on a raked slave
Uh,
stage, and there was quite a lot of moments of comedy from that, including me sliding down the stage and smacking my mouth into the mic stand and drawing blood. And at the same time that happened, his drum kit was sliding down this incline as well. So he had to keep pulling it back. And then he said later that he just forgot how to play drums because it was so stressful trying to keep his drum kit
trying to keep the
together.
drum.
He said, "I can't play drums. I'm leaving the band," which was a terrible shame. But yeah, he was important. He was lovely. So he only replayed on our first track that was on a compilation album, and so he just played on that one, and yeah, and that was it. So, and then we got another drummer, but we were generally into, I mean, it would be Lou Reed, very much so by then. Just anything for me, anything miserable. Um, obviously we were obviously I look back now, we were obviously influenced by a magazine.
Yeah.
And really Joy Division were the main ones that we were influenced by, and obviously I think our first rec but you're still listening to television stuff like that. John Cale, obviously, that pretty much covered it. I think we're all quite obsessive about those people.
Yeah. Well, you did mention one of the live shows. Did you guys play a lot live early on?
Quite a lot. I mean, never enough. It was always hard. So there was a sort of network of places you'd play, but not very many. So at the Welly Club, you'd be trying to get support slots all the time, and we never headlined there. I think we only ever supported. The Welly Club was big. I mean, I think it's probably eight, 900. I'm
Okay.
guessing here. And then there'd be other places like Whole Truck, which is quite a good theatre company. They had rock nights or music nights, and we'd get to headline there a couple of times. That was a good gig as well. And then we'd go out to Lincoln, often disastrously, and then we'd go out to York. And later on, much later on, especially when we got signed, we'd be up to places like Stockton-on-Tees and going down to London. I actually can't remember. I should have emailed Trevor and asked him what our first London show was, but that was hard and it was expensive as well because you'd hire cheap rental vans and they break down on the motorway,
Right.
all that stuff.
Yeah.
So we were gigging, but never quite enough, really. There'd be one, then there'd be a couple of weeks before the next one. So if anything, that was one frustration, but that's part of growing up in a small town. I mean, we did well for a town of that size, but we would have liked to have done more.
Right. Right. Yeah, I've heard those horror stories about the vans breaking down on going from one location to the other. Well, you decided to self-produce and self-finance your first single, and that was "When We Can't Make Laughter Stay,"
Yeah.
released in '81. Uh, I got to say, I really like the guitar in that, and it was a nice sound for '81 for early on, maybe even a little ahead of its time. You know,
Yeah, it
yeah,
was a great guitar
yeah,
sound. And Funny enough, I think I tried to replicate it later and couldn't quite get it. So I think that must have been. I think by then I'd got a little Fender combo. You would just stick the reverb on max, but it's quite small, so it would be loud once it was overdriving. But that by then I'd got. By then I bought a Fender Jazzmaster, obviously influenced by Tom Verlaine. Robert Smith had one right around the same time as well. They just look great as well. So I'd been looking for one for ages. And those things are very hard to find, actually. But it was a great guitar sound. We actually had, there was a producer, a guy called Nick from a sort of ska band. Um, I think produced that one. No, he didn't actually. We had a track on a compilation album before, so I think it was that one. And you're right, yes, this one we self-produced. A little studio called Fairview that was a main one in Hull, and it was good. It had its limitations, but it was good. And because we'd have gone there loads of times, and then I mean, I think with Dave Jones, we'd play something and they'd say, you realize when you hit a cymbal, you should hit the bass drum at the same time. And we're going, oh, okay, it's supposed to, because again, um, you don't know. And yeah, Fairview was great. And yes, we did Laughter there. We did the B-side at Cargo in Rochdale, which was a big sort of part of our story. But it is, yeah, it was a nice single. I think any music of your own you're always frustrated with and kind of think, oh, I wish we'd done that, or I wish this sound had been better. But that first single, I wouldn't really change anything about it. It was, the song was really easy to write, um, and it was just really easy to record. We had a demo of it where I played drums. I can't remember what I think. Yeah, we had a rehearsal studio, so uh, I think I went to the cheap studio where I'd recorded my punk band and we did a demo with me playing drums and then overdubbing the guitar on top. And then we probably did the single in 2 hours, like an hour to record and an hour to mix. We had a new drummer by then called Jock, who was lovely as well. One overdub on the single, and that was it. It was very magical. They had nice big old Neumann mics, and then they had a big old sort of reverb as well. So I think one of the reasons the sound's good is the reverb's kind of really overdriving. So you got maximum reverb on the Fender amp, and then you got maximum reverb on
Yeah.
on the spring reverb in the studio as well. So it was pretty good. Yeah, it was well, who knows if anybody else liked it, but we liked it.
That's the second time doing these that I've heard the Neumann mic mentioned, and I can't remember who I talked to about that, talking about how the quality of those microphones. Well, Peter Hook, New Orders. Peter Hook must have liked what he heard or seen some potential in you guys. You remember how he approached the band about recording some demos?
Yeah, it was very strange actually, because by that time, the track on a compilation album called Mrs. Wilson's Children and called Knowledge, and that was kind of the start. That was very Joy Division-y, but still very stripped down. Really, again, this was Dave's only recording with us, and then we'd had a single. So Peel was playing us a lot by that time. And then we'd be sending demos out to Melody Maker where they'd review them. And we were getting quite a lot of interest early on because it was a reasonably contemporary sound, you know. There wasn't really anybody else doing it, you know. I mean, maybe something like The Cure would be quite close to that, you know, the early Cure, but not much stuff. And then obviously Joy Division, etc. And when we recorded Laughter, we actually did the B-side at Cargo Studios in Rochdale. That was a great place. We knew about it again through the network, and that was where Joy Division had actually recorded Atmosphere. So it was their second studio after Strawberry in Stockport. And we recorded the B-side there, good sound on the B-side, and we also got they really got they could record the voice really well at Cargo. And we worked with an engineer called Colin Richardson, who had engineered Atmosphere. So we sent him a copy, and it had a really nice sleeve. So which was designed by my girlfriend's sister, Liz Wilmington. And there it was in the studio when New Order were recording. Probably, I've forgotten which one it is. Probably their first single, which was recorded there. It's got a copper-coloured sleeve. Bow Out Ceremony, and um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think they were recording that. He just thought, oh, that's a nice sleeve, and he picked it up and he liked it and just wrote to us, said, hey, I like that single. Have you got any more stuff? Do you want any help producing? So it's like, wow. And so we sent him more stuff. And I think there was quite a long, I think it all took a long time because, hey, New Order were busy. It was just happening right then. And yeah, so it was really weird. I can't say how strange that whole period was because Ian Curtis had killed himself. We'd played that, that evening, and
Yeah.
that was something that was very heavy and sad. And then at the same time, you had New Order doing this new stuff, and it's like Ceremony was good. You're thinking, wow, this guy can sing, the guitarist. And then Hookie's sending his early tapes of things like Everything's Gone Green, where they're using sequencer, and you're thinking, wow, this is phenomenal. So of course we started using a sequencer straight away, and it took time because it's factory, it was all a little bit all over the place. But I mean, quite early on, he said, "Do you want to? Hey, if you want me to record stuff or produce stuff for you, I will." And in fact, what happened was, um, he'd offered to producers. We had a sniff from a few sort of record companies, but the main one was Aura, and
Okay.
they'd released a Nico album and a couple of, I think, Annette Peacock, so they're quite cool. And we went to see them. It's some American dude with a beard, and he was like, "Yeah, great. I want to do. I want to release. Yeah, I want to release Fate as a single, but I want to use your demo." And we were like, and I want to get Peter Hook to remix it. And we were like, we thought record companies were supposed to get you better, better places, better recording studios, and
Yeah.
not release your demos you've done yourself, especially
Right.
when the demo was good, but it was a demo, and so I think at that point, then Hooky was like, oh, okay. Oh, I know what happened. Yes, in fact, we sent him the contract from Aura, And he said, right, don't sign it. Don't worry, I'll sort something out with. I reckon, Factory Benelux or Factory will do something. I'll have word to Tony. I'll have whatever. And if you a while later he comes back and says, yeah, you can do a one-off on Factory. They won't keep any rights. You have 50-50 on the publishing, or we'll do this. And it was like, well, okay. So that's what happened next.
Yeah, there was a gap in there, like you said, because the 12-inch single mixed by Peter was released in Factory Benelux in '84.
Yeah.
So that it did take a while.
Yeah, so and again, I don't know where that all went. So, but I think just people were busy, and we were talking to 4AD or Situation 2 or Beggars Banquet at the time. They were always interested, but it was primarily Vaughan Oliver, the phenomenal designer who loved our
Yeah,
stuff. So I think at the same time, there were a lot of different things happening, and I think yeah, it was just the music biz as well. Factory took a long time to get their stuff together. We were talking to different people. I mean, I'm probably somewhere. Yeah, I'm interested now when it was that we'd recorded with Aura. I think that has to be 83, probably like 82, 83. So yeah, it took a while.
yeah,
And I don't really know why, but I know that at the time things did seem to move agonizingly slowly, but at the same time, there was always a little hope of something on the horizon. So just, just having a few people here and there who were into it just gave you hope and
yeah,
made you keep going.
yeah. Well, I really like the early Factory releases. Just how simple they were. Fact 23, Fact
Yeah.
45. But yeah, and there was a lot of mystery. I think I mean that was great marketing. I think to do it like that. Well, the band you mentioned did sign to the Beggars Banquet affiliate Situation 2. Do you recall being signed?
Yeah. Um, Again, that took a very long time. So Ivo from 4AD and Vaughan from 4AD loved our stuff. So really early on, we sent them a demo of what were the songs? The Illuminated ones, Hope of Heaven, and Fate, and they
Okay.
liked those really early on. And said we really like it. But I think Ivo thought we weren't a 4AD. He liked us, but thought we weren't a 4AD band. Um, so that always made it difficult. And then they were always like, yeah, we want to do something with you, but they were really vague and, hard to pin down. Then, of course, once Factory were putting out a single, then, of course, they started getting a lot more interested. And at that point, they said, yeah, maybe Situation 2. So Ivo wants you on, but doesn't want you on 4AD. So we'll put you on Situation 2, which was good, but it obviously meant as well, Ivo was a real creative. We had a nice A&R uncle, the boss of Situation 2 was good, but, he was, well, for a start, he wasn't as well known as Ivo was. So, that was always a bit like non-optimum. It would have been better to be on 4AD.
Right.
But we got 4AD's designer, Vaughan Oliver, so, and hey, it was a great record label. Here's me moaning about it. It's the second best, but it was still great. But yeah, it was the fact that Factory were interested that really got them to sign. One of the major problems with getting them to sign us was that we used to send out Christmas tapes to people, and they were like joke ones.
Yeah.
And we sent out a Christmas tape that had us doing a version of Forever and Ever by the terrible glam group Slick. And we also did White Christmas, like Bing Crosby, with a little Casio VL tone, the little drum box going boom bop 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 bop, and and so it was ludicrous, and we fell over laughing. And of course, then Vaughan Oliver puts it on in the very, very serious 4AD office, and they were all sort of apparently horrified. So that could have been what delayed us being signed. They still we
You
were so
still you
tasteless
still
and
have you
shallow.
still have copies of those? You still have copies?
That one, sadly, no. I
Yeah.
don't think so. If I have, I'll send you one. 'Cause
That
the
would be great.
I'm saying White Christmas was pretty rocking. It was, um, And yeah, anyway, that probably delayed it, but they did. Um, but because of the factory single, then they were saying, yes, we're going to sign you. They were always a bit funny about money. But of course, in typical fashion, later on, Hook goes, well, yeah, well, if you don't want to do an album for Factory, then that's up to you. And we're like, what? Because he'd never mentioned a word.
Yeah,
So we always, we felt terribly guilty. Of course, we'd recorded Fate with Hooky, and it wasn't that we had mixed feelings. It was great working with him, because it was the single was very different from how we'd have done it. But there were
yeah,
time constraints, and in fact, what happened on that one, the guitar sound wasn't very good, and the Hooky programmed the Oberheim and brought in the TR-808, which of course you would have used all the bass, and that was fabulous. But my guitar sound just wasn't very good. Strawberry wasn't really. I needed something a little bit heavier.
yeah,
When you're a kid, you've only got one little amp. You don't know how to get another sound. I didn't. Then they lost the vocal because there was noise on it. So the vocal on Fate was the doubled one rather than the original. So it's a little bit meh. So but nonetheless, it was phenomenal, really exciting, and it was getting in indie dance charts and stuff as well, or in dance charts as well. It was on 12-inch, obviously with a kind of dub mix.
yeah,
Surprise,
right.
surprise, and so that in itself um, was was phenomenal, and I think by the time it was released, we already thought that uh, Beggars or Situation 2 were going to sign us. But, again, all those things, it took quite a long time and they didn't offer us a lot of money.
Yeah,
And we didn't really know enough to say, look, we want more money. We probably had a few thousand on
yeah,
top of the recording budget, which in those days was probably more than 2000 is now. So it's probably the equivalent of 15 grand. So we could buy an electric piano because even at the time, even whilst we were doing these sort of spiky guitar things, we were already doing sort of slow, heavy piano stuff. And so actually, and doing that on stage is really hard,
yeah, yeah.
because
To replicate
till
that.
suddenly we got a little Kawai traveling piano, a real piano that you sort of folded up, weighed a bloody ton, and you'd roll it around, and then it'd go out of tune. It was great fun, But yeah, so the advance allowed us to get that, I think, and not much more. Oh, I think we bought a DX7. We wanted a Prophet 5, but we couldn't afford it, so we got a DX7. So, but it was a record deal. We
Yeah.
were very
Well,
happy.
well, do you recall the recording sessions for the Hope of Heaven album?
Yeah, I think we all record it really well because we're on a tight budget. We would get the nighttime use of Fairview, so I'm thinking that we probably recorded it over about 14 days, 14 or 16. So we'd record one or two songs a day, and then overdub and mix them in another day. And it was a good studio, but again, we were all exhausted. We were working at night, so there are we got Colin Richardson in to sort of co-produce. He was a cargo engineer, and he's very celebrated now, a really, really good producer, and he really got the sound. But Fairview's desk was quite peculiar, um, and a lot of it was just wonderful. Some of the songs just came together really easily. Some of them weren't as good as the demos that we'd done, because the desk was a bit funny and it wasn't as good as Cargo. But we couldn't have done it at Cargo because then we'd have needed hotels, it would have been a bigger budget. So
Yeah,
really it was, you have to do it at Fairview. And in fact, Situation 2 as well was saying, yeah, you need to record it there. I think again, just to save a bit of money, penny wise, pound foolish. Um,
right.
but not decrying the studio because some of the things we recorded there were great. Although in retrospect, I do think later, well, when you were recording an album and the piano was a really key instrument on a lot of the songs, maybe you should have had a studio with a full-sized piano, because what they had was a tiny Eve staff little Art
Yeah,
Deco thing
yeah,
that just was very boingy, and they'd say to us, "Hey, when we mic it up, it sounds like a grand piano." Well, actually, the next single had a grand piano on it. It doesn't sound anything like the piano but then on Hope of Heaven. But again, the fact it was heavily sort of EQ'd and boingy with lots of reverb on that adds to it as well. So we recorded at night. I had a little Victorian harmonium that we took in and overdubbed that on quite a few things. Um, it was wonderful. We had a friend called Paul Muller who should really have been credited, but I mean, we're not credited, are we? He played violin and sax. He was great. He would do things like wait until I've recorded a really impassioned vocal in the middle of the night. It's at 4 a.m. in the morning, and then I walk out of the vocal booth, and he's there, bah, with a saxophone, scaring the life out
I'll
of
wake
me.
you up.
Um, it was
Uh,
also very cold, so we had to push my car off. So we had to park on a hill, because the car would never work or anything. But it was good fun. By then, I was actually at uni. I can't really work out why as well. So I failed all my exams in year 2, but managed to talk my way around. But it was great. Although, again, it was tiring
yeah,
and a lot of things were, you couldn't quite get the sound you wanted. Uh, Peter Hook again was fabulous because, he could have taken umbrage we hadn't signed um, to Factory, but he lent us his gear. He came over while they were recording Low Life in his Audi Quattro, obviously had driven terrifyingly quickly. So they were recording in the daytime. So one night he just brought over their Prophet 5 and their emulator. And that's what we used. So on the illuminated ones, there's this kind of choir sound. And right from the beginning, I'd heard that emulator choir sound and wanted it. And they had it, and so yeah, there's quite a lot of Prophet 5 on there as well on the version of Fate on the
yeah.
album. He didn't bring, it would have been even better if he'd brought the Oberheim because that was a great drum
Oh,
machine.
oh
But
yeah.
we used the Emu one. I forgot what it was called. Um, uh, a slightly cheaper one that the studio had. We didn't have our own. So yeah, he really came through was for us. He was, magnificent really. And yeah, the a lot of the sounds we could not have realized without using New Order's gear. So it is the same Prophet 5 you hear on Low Life, and it's the same emulator that you um, that you hear on Blue Monday. Yeah, so thank you, Hooky. What a mensch.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was nice that he was supportive, through all that recording, showed up and helped out. Well, the album did come out in '84. Uh, can you remember how it fared with the public and critics?
Um, well, I think the public just didn't even know it happened. So I don't know how many copies it sold. I think a couple of thousand, maybe. Um, and it critically, yeah, we couldn't have asked for more. I mean, in sounds, Chris Roberts said, "Nyam Nyam of the Great White Hope," and he'd said with the psychedelic furs away in America, maybe this is what we need. So we've got phenomenal reviews in sounds, and then phenomenal reviews in Melody Maker. But unfortunately, maybe what happened around that time is that John Peel had been very supportive when we were an indie band. Then suddenly, when we were on Situation 2, just wouldn't really play anything. It was really weird. Could never quite get the hang of it. I mean, John Peel was a hero. He was also very dodgy. His producer, John Waters, was very dodgy, as in very controlling and bullying behavior to the women who used to do radio plugging. John Wilson is no longer with us, but they just had this real sense of, oh, I don't know, confidence and ownership that people from public school backgrounds had. So it was, Peel was quite a nuanced figure and could be very awkward with people as well. So for some reason he didn't play surf, and that probably made a difference. So we'd get so there'd be foreign sales somewhere where there'd be some radio station somewhere that's playing it, and then there'd be a few sales there, and then somewhere else. So I think it was mainly down to to radio play. I'm sure we got Kid Jensen stuff. I think we got the other people, Janice Long, I think. So
Janice,
the other kind of hip DJs, but just no Peel.
yeah,
Never really worked out why. And there wasn't really a lot of point in asking, but
right.
just having played the other stuff a lot, which would really help. Because he played the factory single a lot. Yeah, the Situation 2 stuff he
Yeah,
wasn't really into.
it seemed like from interviews that I've done in talking about John Peel, he liked to be there at the onset, the genesis of the band. It helped give them a start when they were more indie, you know.
Oh yeah.
And once they signed to a bigger label, like you said, he kind of lost interest a little bit. I don't know if he saw it as not so much selling out, but you know what I'm saying. I mean,
Well, again, he was very opinionated. And of course, I
yeah,
guess we want that, don't we? Overall, he was wonderful.
right.
And I doubt that any of us would have done what we were doing without him. Because again, I
Oh
hadn't
yeah.
mentioned it earlier, but of course, you would you would sit up late, listen to his show, record it on a cassette recorder. The Peel sessions you would have a little cassette copy of, and you'd play them again and again and again. But he liked ownership
Yeah,
and almost complete credit. So I do remember with our friends, the Red Guitars, they had a single that he played a lot, Good Technology, and
yeah.
then they had a follow-up single, and for some reason, Kid Jensen got his hand on it first and played it before John Peel. So that evening, I'm listening to the show, and John Peel's going in his slightly fake, Liverpool accent. How, oh yeah, well, Red Guitar's got a new single, but Kid Jensen played it today, so here it goes, and he just chucked it across the studio and smashed it.
Oh, okay.
So,
Yeah.
again, people were very,
Yeah.
uh, kind of quite totalitarian in their
Right.
attitudes. So,
Right.
yeah, I think for us, getting an album out and sort of getting out sound in your head was a really big deal. And you knew also that getting consistent radio play was what you needed best or what you needed most. And we never quite got there, but you didn't really know that it wasn't really going to happen for quite a long time. And you hadn't, there was always hope that Peel might play the next one, but it just didn't really quite get there. And I guess this was a time of videos as well. Like if beggars
Right.
had put money in for
I get
videos and
what-
stuff like that,
Right.
that could have happened. But we were just slightly lower priority for beggars, and they were pushing Gene Loves Jezebel at the time. So, and then later Southern Death Cult, and so we were sort of slightly lower down. But there was still a lot happening. Lots of good shows at the ICA, lots of things in London, and it was very exciting. I just wish we'd put more records out.
Well, the band first came across my radar when I picked up a copy of the EP of The Architect. And I know I sent you a picture of that. Uh,
Mm.
and again, here it is. Still have my copy
Ah,
like that. And on first listen, my favorite track was And to Hold version 2, which is on here. There was a version 1 that was on the album.
yeah.
Uh, and it's still my favorite song.
Well,
Uh,
well,
the
yeah.
I like it
Uh,
better. I like it better than the album version. I like this version.
yeah, it was. I mean, again, the album version, there wasn't a proper piano.
Yeah.
So,
Right. Yeah.
and the album version wasn't as good as the demo we'd done of that. And I
Yeah.
think actually on that EP, there's the original demo of Hope of Heaven,
Yeah.
the title track for the album. The demo's just better than the Fairview
Yeah.
version for various reasons. And yeah, and so the Architect was more piano-ish, and then Antihold was quite an old song, but it just really needed a piano to make it sound good. So that one was recorded at Palladium. So it was our first decent recording studio. Palladium was the big place where the Cocktails would record. And they had a lovely big Yamaha grand piano. And yeah, it was recording that was just super easy. It just, I think, I think I must have dubbed the vocals on. I don't think we would have recorded it all at once. But again, it just all went really quickly, and we recorded it probably within, and just a day or two. I think Colin Richardson went up with us. We used we wanted some string bass on there, and there was a terrific guy called Ronnie Ray who just listened to it once, we were like, "Do you want to know what the chords are?" And he was obviously, "I know what the chords are because there's only that four of them or whatever." Actually, no, there were some minor chords in Hold, and yeah, and then in fact, yes, on that one he just played on the outro, and it was a favorite song of mine actually. Like all the songs, they were kind of ways of kind of documenting horrible things that used to happen when you lived in Yorkshire. And
Okay.
so To Hold was a story from a newspaper where um, somebody murdered his wife and kids. You know,
Yeah.
and I found that very shocking. But there was a lot of violence in Hull, and so again, the meeting, which is a little bit like it, because people used to often mix them up on the album, which is another song I like. That was about my seeing a friend who'd been sexually assaulted by some squaddies. There's just a lot of that kind of stuff happened. So in a way, that's why our music wasn't necessarily that cheerful because this stuff was
Yeah.
around you. And so Jan to Hold, it just came from that, from reading a story. It had a slightly complex genesis because it, it we'd had an earlier song that that was basically the same chord sequence, and we tried recording it as the B side of the single, and it was in Lincoln, and it was just terrible. And so when I decided, oh no, when I just had all the lines in my head for Am to Hold itself, I said to Trevor, all right, well, it's using the same, it's basically the same as Louise's Asleep. So well, I'm not doing that then. And no, honestly, it's much better. It's kind of really slow and it's really kind of, it's really grim. No, I'm not doing that. It's the same chord sequence. So he took a bit of persuading, and then I think it's fair to say he liked it as well. But it
Oh,
was that was definitely a high point. Recording that EP, getting the better version of Hope of Heaven out there.
yeah.
Um, and yeah, does it has a little, yeah, I think there's one song that's just lots of harmonium and squeaks from our friend Paul Muller as well. That was really nice. I think it's not credited. I think it's on there. And so it was a really magical time. And again, a wonderful sleeve by Vaughan Oliver, because what I
Right.
haven't said with all of this is, whilst Beggars were always a little bit lukewarm, he was always a real champion. And
Right.
in fact, we also made some foolish mistakes because for a long time they were pressuring us for Robin Guthrie to
Oh,
produce us, and we were like, what? Who was it? Was it Felt he'd produced? And it sounded just like the Cocteau Twins, so we just said no. Maybe we should have done. You
right.
know, certainly if you haven't done that one, we should have come up with another one later on and got him to do it, or worked out what kind of song might work with him, because he got fantastic sounds out of his records. But
Right.
yeah, he got really cheesed off with us that we didn't, because I think we were stupid as well. When we did interviews, we didn't really know what an interview was like. We were really suspicious of journalists, and so they'd get very little useful copy out of us because we were just a bit young and stupid or naive or whatever. And again, perhaps if we'd had Robin Guthrie producing us, maybe we'd have got something different in the way we had with Hooky. But he was nice, but he was a bit of a cantankerous so and so as well, So, and of course, we'd only ever talked to him at Beggar's Banquet when you'd been drinking until 1 in the morning, so you wouldn't really have rational conversations anyway. So, yeah, because you're not gonna, because you're in your early 20s, just how it is.
Right. Right. Yeah. Looking at the back of the credits, yeah. Ronald, here we go. Ronald Ray, string bass, trumpet, John Sampson. Yeah. 23 envelope. Yeah. I remember thinking the band was Scottish before I found out because recorded at Palladium, Edinburgh. So I was thinking that you guys were Scottish, you know.
Yeah, well, figures, I mean, again, a lot of Scotland's quite a miserable place, and yeah, it was great being in Edinburgh,
Yeah.
and I think they had a cottage that you'd rent as well. So, even though we didn't do it for enough to be in a place and a really good recording studio and to execute something and it just work and it sound like it sounded in your head, that you're lucky when that happens, even if it doesn't happen that often. And that place was great. working with again Ronald Ray, just working with different people who are doing something different every take. Um, you know, that's great because you're not overthinking it. So he was lovely to work with. I think John Sampson, the trumpeter, we made a bit of a mistake because we probably needed a trombonist. We wanted something really in the bottom register,
Uh,
and it was a little bit low for him. He found it hard, because we didn't really know that much about the instrumentation, but it was magical. And again, the architect was, another song about another woman where I was at a bus stop and I heard two squaddies, one of them describe how he'd punched a woman. And then she was a bit up, a bit up herself because she was an actress. Just this stuff would happen.
yeah,
And so again, the architect just happened when I wrote a song about it, probably a week or so later to exorcise, what was around you. And again, that recording that really, it was really easy. And around that time as well, we got more gigs at places that had pianos, and then we do an acoustic set, and then we do an electric set, and that was great as well, rather than switching between one and the other. So even though it wasn't really coming together, it was still, and the vans were still breaking down, and you often would be waiting by a motorway, seriously, with a big pile of stuff. Yeah, your Yamaha DX7 and a piano and an amplifier sitting on the by the by the A1 or whatever, and
it's
and then some of you thumbing a lift so you'd get to the venue before and saying the gear might be a bit late, all that kind of stuff. I think we played the ICA around that time as well. And again, that was a good show too. So they were good times, even though you had the sense it wasn't really happening. But we were doing better than we expected and better than a lot of other bands were. So it was fine.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You can laugh about those things now, with time. Why did the band, or when did the band call it a day? That was when.
Well, I mean, ultimately, we had our, the Terry, the A&R who'd signed us to Situation 2 left because of personal issues, and then so we didn't really have an A&R man. Then Steve from Situation 2 was kind of as acting as an A&R man. Then he moved sideways. Then they got a new A&R guy and classic record company stuff. Oh yeah, we really like, yeah, damn it, just send me some more. Send me some more. And of course, if you're an A&R guy, it's a bit and you have and the band that somebody else signed becomes really big, do you get any credit? No.
Right,
And so, but at the same time, if you maybe want to replace them with another band and they have a hit, are you going to get credit? Yes, you are. So the new fella, whose name I have forgotten, I don't particularly have a grudge against them, although as forever, it takes them months to tell you that you're gone. They never really say, you just kind of hear it from other people. And so I think he signed maybe a few months later he got the Charlatans. So they had hits pretty early on. So at that time that was quite a blow. And then we regrouped as Horseland.
right, right.
I think because I think we just lost confidence. So I thought, well, maybe let's get a woman in as well. And it, it wasn't sort of country stuff, but we wanted to have kind of more stripped down piano stuff. And then we had a friend called John from the Red Guitars. He wanted to join us. And so again, because he was a bit older and a bit more worldly wise, we thought, oh, that'll be better. So as Horseland, we then recorded a track called Love Dies Again, which is really just a Nyam Nyam song, and that wasn't bad actually. Unfortunately, the master's gone missing for that one, and although again the studio version maybe wasn't as good as the demo, it had some nice guitar work on it. It had a Gretsch by then, which was fantastic for feeding back, and that was all right. And again, that got great reviews, but of course, what's the point in being more or less the same band and changing your name? I think it was just depression and by then we just thought that's it. So maybe a new name will help. And if you've got new people and you sort of want to get a new name. So that was, we put that out and Red Rhino distributed it. And again, it got good reviews. But what happened next? Red Rhino went bust. So at that point, it was like, oh, okay, right, okay. And in fact, by that point, I'd moved to London. I'd got a job as an international musician, and the rationale for that was being in London would help me push the band. And but I was still going back to Hull every weekend to rehearse, which was somewhat tiring. And so really, in fact, then what happened was I said to Trevor, look, why don't we spend 6 months recording, just coming up with another bunch of songs, and then see if we can get a deal, and I'll move back for 6 months, and I'll leave the job at International Musician, which was, a really good job to have. And he just wasn't feeling it. He had a job, didn't want to give up his job, and yeah. So at that point, I thought, fine, I'll do the I'll do the writing stuff instead.
Yeah.
So then the writing stuff was not really a poor substitute because it wasn't as harrowing. It's
Yeah.
like if you write, somebody says your book's terrible. Well, I don't really care. It's just not as personal, and you're not as haunted by it. And it's a little, it's still creative and it's wonderful, but it's just a
Right.
bit more of a job, and you have just a bit more independence,
Right.
and you're not as reliant on other people. So yeah, so at that point then I
Well, I wanted to say before you continued
go
that
on.
it was how ironic it was that earlier on with the band you were suspicious of journalists,
Yeah, I know.
and then you became one.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, what is it? The poacher turned gamekeeper, or whatever, and we
Right.
were, yeah, we were silly. We just but we didn't sort of realize that you need to tell people stuff and not be ridiculously overprotective and not want to oversimplify things. That's just, some people have got more idea about the persona they need to
Yeah.
charm people and get what they want. And of course, I realize now that even people like Iggy and Bowie, who you thought were really alternative, were very ambitious, had a persona, knew how to give good copy. And so in a way, when you've done that stuff and not done it as well as them, it's a good in for being a journalist because you can appreciate what people are doing. And so I think that's a good thing. I think it does give you insight. I think if you haven't been in a studio, you might not appreciate how hard it is. And it has given you a real interest for how you work inside a studio, and whether what comes out is what you want or is going to be good, and how tricky it is to capture that. So I have felt lucky about that. But yeah, we did quite a lot of interviews with people that just now didn't really get printed because we were rubbish at interviews. It's just part of the job. Nowadays, of course, you go to the Brit School, and I'm
Yeah.
serious, they would tell you exactly how you do things like that. But
Right.
we were miserable little sods, and
Well,
yeah,
well,
but
tell me who some of your favorite artists that you talk to, that are more most interesting.
oh, that's really hard to say. Um, I mean, over the year, so I started out international musician and would interview a lot of people that I liked, like the Psychedelic Furs or whoever. But it wasn't, um, I didn't necessarily love interviewing them if I liked the band. It was sort of a job. But there were some people who were a real shock. And again, I do remember on International Musician early on interviewing Buddy Guy, and he was playing at the Town and Country Club, and he was staying in a tiny hotel. So I went to his hotel, and he had his little Guild guitar on the bed because there was nowhere else to stash it. And even though I didn't really believe in playing blues music, I still enjoyed the really intense Buddy Guy stuff. And that was just a revelation because he was telling me how he made a little basic one-string guitar called a diddley bow and nailed it on the side of his shed, and how magical it was coming to Chicago. And that was definitely a real sort of shivers around the back moment, because I'd never do blues, but we know that that's where it all came from. And even a lot of the sounds that you're looking at came from people like Buddy Guy, who's obviously a big influence on Jimi Hendrix. So that was
Right.
huge. I mean, I'd never really been a big Stones fan, but I think then I got more into the Stones afterwards because open G guitar, if you're playing stuff solo, open G is quite good for that. So certainly I've interviewed Keith Richards a lot of times over the years, and that was good fun. I interviewed Iggy Pop, and obviously he was a kind of the childhood hero, and they were always very, very interesting. I interviewed him a lot of times over, so I think maybe four times, and the last time of which was when I already knew I was doing a book on him, which was great because I knew whenever he told me something that was not true, and I could
Yeah.
go, oh, really, and that was great. That. But he was lovely. It was interesting, he was again a very interesting, charming person when he wanted to be. They were good, that was good fun. And yeah, in terms of other ones, there were bands that I was real fans of, like a band called Glaswegian band called Teenage Fan Club,
Oh yeah.
and I loved interviewing them. And I think there was quite a lot of solace when I would go and listen to a band like that who weren't going anywhere, and
Yeah.
just think these people are geniuses, and that's just how it is. Sometimes you can make great music, and they certainly do, and didn't go anywhere at all. And so I had a lovely time sitting in on or watching their rehearsal in Glasgow, and then surviving a night of drinking with them, which was not easy, and took a lot of forethought and planning to survive a night of drinking
How about
spirits in
how about
Glasgow.
some, how about
And
somebody that a musician that you had a preconceived idea what they were like and it turned out to be totally different, when you talk.
oh, I'm not necessarily certain. I mean, there are certainly lots of interviews that turned out differently from how you hoped.
Yeah.
Because after International Musician, they went and launched a magazine for Remap for the radio industry, which didn't work out. They couldn't get enough advertising. Then I came back to International. No, then I went and launched a guitar magazine,
Yeah.
and so went back to my old boss, who's a notorious figure I have a sneaking affection for, called Richard Desmond, and I had a one sheet of A4 saying, "Let's do a magazine on guitars, or a guitarist magazine, because the existing one is just all hippie stuff. We want something that's got Johnny Marr on the cover."
Yeah.
So that was a great magazine to work for. And again, we had a really good story on John Lee Hooker early on, but then I remember later on doing a cover story on him, and being told, "Oh, John's really, really pleased that you're doing this interview with him." And I do remember playing the tape for people of the interview that lasted about 20 minutes, by which time I'd burned through about 120 questions. So it was like me saying to him, um, "So John, so sometimes when you're playing live, you just make up your lyrics on the spot, don't you?" Nope. Oh, but last time I spoke to you, you'd said on this song how you came up with the lyrics. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. And yeah, it was a great take because of just me dying bit by bit. And in the end, thinking, yeah, I think actually I had to
I,
turn it into a
I,
positive by, getting lots of other people talking about John Lee Hooker as well. But he was a so and
I,
so.
I have to tell you, are you going?
Bless him.
One of guys I just spoke with, he had a hearing loss earlier on. He's gotten most of it back through therapy and everything. He's it's almost completely healed. But he told me, he said you may have to speak really slow and maybe repeat stuff, questions. So I asked him early on. I always ask this question: Did you have a you remember having a fond childhood? Did you have a nice childhood? And he said, nope. And I said, okay, where did I go from here? Okay, let's go to the next question. And he said, then he came and he said, didn't catch that. So what he was
Oh,
saying was,
okay.
nope, I didn't hear it. I said, okay, that's different. So then we were able to continue on. But it reminded me so much what you just said. You said no. Yeah, that whole migration, like you said, of the blues from like the Mississippi Delta up to Chicago. A lot of those musicians moving, going up there. That's something. That's
It was
something.
very beautiful,
Yeah.
and then later on, after I'd launched a bunch more magazines, that then became a vehicle for what was really my first proper book. I'd done some sort of editing jobs and cheap books, but it was called Portrait of the Blues, because I wanted to have the musicians talk in their own words. So that was an oral history, and I collaborated with the amazing photographer Val Wilmer for that. And so I drove that road. I went up Highway 61 loads of times. I think I did 18,000 miles, 12,000 miles on one trip, so I spent a long time. So I went from Chicago and Detroit and Milwaukee all the way down to New Orleans and back twice. Then I was on the West Coast as well, and that was fabulous. I did have to sell a Zematis guitar I'd bought cheap to do all of that on the advance I had, and that was definitely magical. And by that time, I was already thinking about an Iggy Pop biography that was a collaboration with somebody else. But then, of course, after being based in America quite a while, um, then I got a call from Mojo. It was weird. I'd actually written to Mojo for some freelance work early on because I'd launched a magazine. They took, which eventually closed when they got bought out. And Mojo it was sort of an older kind of, a bit of a classic rock magazine, I guess, like Mojo. Mojo took a lot of our stories. So I wrote and said, "Oh, can I do this for you or this or this?" And they went, "No, we don't want any more writers." It's like, okay. But
Okay.
then once I was in doing my blues stuff and I was out in San Francisco, it just gives you a bit more cachet, the fact you're a bit more unavailable. And then their later editor, Matt Snow, called me up when I was when I was staying in San Francisco and said, Do you want to write a story on Howlin' Wolf, funnily enough? And so that was when I was finishing up my blues book. So even whilst I was doing that, I thought there was a job at a magazine that I really liked. And yeah, that worked out very nicely. And yeah, with Mojo, yeah, lots of great interviews there. Most people I would really like, people like Keith Richards, I had lovely times with. I mean, I guess he's not speaking to me anymore because I did the book on Brian Jones. But, and, I also got to interview people like Eric Clapton, who I really dislike. I think he is an unpleasant character who has no insight and is racist fundamentally. I interviewed him the morning. Um, uh, and yeah, he was yeah, just not a nice person. So yeah, it's good. There were lots of different people that I interviewed, and yeah, with Clapton, he was the morning that Enoch Powell had died, and he was saying he felt sad. And Enoch Powell was, one of the key racists. Was an out and out racist, and that was a bit of a weird one. And of course, you've got a PR sitting next to you who doesn't really want you to talk about that, and then at the end cut the interview short, so I couldn't really call him out sufficiently. But yeah, again, I was very lucky with at Mojo to do a lot of things like that, and the people I'd interview wouldn't necessarily have to be the people that I really liked. It would just be people I was interested in. But the people liked and was interested in were probably more the people whose music wasn't like mine. So I had lovely times interviewing people like Dr. John or John Cale and things like that as well. I made sure I never interviewed Lou Reed because he was just an arsehole. And so yeah, I got away with that. And I think I must have done Iggy once or twice for Mojo as well. So yeah, yeah, again, we were lucky. It was a really good time. I joined under a good editor. Then when he left, I really used the freedom to do a lot of crazy things. Like we had Iggy naked on the cover with
Yeah.
scratch off silver pants. And there was a time you could really take risks. So in a way, I suppose I understood how to manipulate the magazine industry in a way that would have benefited me if it happened from the music side. But of course, all the friends or rivals who'd made it in the 80s, a time when we didn't, then by the late 90s, they're all kind of calling you up and and saying, do you want to listen to my new album, whatever, and it's just terrible. So nothing lasts forever. So even though we only had even though with us we felt like it was cut short, lots of stuff gets cut short for everybody, just how it is.
Yes, it is. That's the business. Yeah, you're right. You're right. Well, Paul, I think it's really helped. This interview has really gone well because of your background, because you are a journalist. Uh, I don't have any degree or never worked in that. This is my only outlet, but it's something that I have a passion for. But I think it's helped because of where you've been, what you've done, and with the music, with Nyam Nyam as well. So it's really flowed real well. It's been nice visiting with you. Uh, anything else that you'd like to mention or bring up? What's going on with you these days?
Well, funnily enough, having done 3 books in a row,
Yeah,
I think I have, I have to say I have been very lucky. So even, being in a band and getting the stuff out that you cared about, I think I was lucky to do that. And even that very first single, Laughter, I was lucky just to have something like that came out when I was like probably just 18 or 19, and there's a little slice of your life, and it kind of says you were there, and I
yeah,
was lucky to do that. And then I was lucky to work at the magazines that I did, although I did a lot of work for them as well, and a lot of them were quite successful. And then again, having I basically left Mojo when there was a typical sort of dispute. I'd also taken over Q, and they wanted to take it younger, and I knew they were wrong, so I refused. So they got rid of me. Then of course they took younger, and they closed it. But of course, what at the time was really annoying, although not that annoying because I was smart enough to make sure I had a good contract and in a good deal. They didn't rip me off as people so often attempt to. And then I was really lucky to find a good agent. And he then said, "Oh, you were working on a Iggy book some time ago. Have you thought of reviving that?" And again, this agent, Julian Alexander, just helped me have another, I don't know, 12 or 15 years of of really good times writing. But having written 3 books, I couldn't really think of anybody I really wanted to write another book on. I was working on a few ideas, like one about Berlin as a city, but again, that was going back to the same thing. So I just thought, oh, maybe it's time for a change. And I was the school governor at my son's school, a comprehensive in Deptford, and somebody suggested I become a teacher. So
huh,
yeah, I did the ultimate career swerve, and I'm now a physics teacher, a big comprehensive in Southeast London, which I love. It's very, very challenging for all the obvious reasons, but it's been an interesting time, because I've done it through a pandemic. So I lived in interesting times, the early punk days and the post-punk days, and then the great days of whatever, music magazines. I have been lucky, and then I lived through the interesting times of of being a school teacher in a pandemic with a governor with a government who are tr literally trolling you, like not telling you whether you're teaching on the Friday before you're supposed to teach. Just the chaos and incompetence was phenomenal. But, in a strange way, and again, phenomenal, harrowing, but in a strange way, lovely too, So I'm going to do this for a couple more years and then probably just downsize a bit and work fewer days. But yeah, so I am keeping busy in my new routine, and but I got my old jazz master restored, or a little bit worked on it about 2 years ago, and 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 built a new amplifier. I just wanted a small Fender amp that I could overload. And when I got that, I just started playing a song. And in fact, I was playing the Fate riff. And then I just switched it around a bit and I had a really, really good riff. And so I have said to Trevor, right, we're going to do the song. So we did record together for one song, Doubt, when LTM reissued all of
right,
our stuff.
right.
But yeah, I think we will get back together again. But it's got a sequencer on it, like Fate Hate. So I need to get the cash together to buy a little sequencer and a synth like our old Pro one. And
Yeah,
on a teacher's salary, it's month by month. So
yeah,
if I get the keyboard and a little synth, then maybe there will be one more track, and maybe we'll get on our bended knee to LTM and see if they'll put it out or something. It's a
no,
shame that we can't get Vaughan to do the sleeve. We've talked about this, but Vaughan Oliver, who did our sleeves, was a big,
yeah,
was a huge help. He's a lovely man, wonderful designer, and it was very hard when we lost him. I
yeah,
think it was the year before last. I had seen him not that long before. He'd sort of been through the wilderness a bit because his stuff was out of fashion, and then but suddenly he was a prof, working at quite a lot of unis, and I saw him quite a bit. But yeah, I'm sad. It would have been wonderful to record one more track with a Vaughan Oliver sleeve, but that's not to be, I guess. So, my love to him. In all of this, one's always been, there's a few people who were there for you and really helped. And, Peter Hook was one. I'm sad he's not playing with New Order, but that's, his concern. And then Vaughan Oliver was another, and I miss him.
Yeah,
That's, lots of happy times and sadness when we lose talented and lovely people like that. But I guess that's how it goes.
yeah, that is part of life. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you do have the memories. That's
Yeah.
always there. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Well, any plans on playing live at all? Do you,
No, I
you
don't think we would really.
yeah,
I don't know. No, I can't see it somehow. And I'm not. I saw the Velvet Underground on their reunion in 1993, and it just put me off the whole idea of
okay,
reunions. I mean, which is unreasonable because I know the television reunion was absolutely fabulous, so I avoided that, thinking it was going to be diminishing returns. But
right.
generally not into those. But you never know. There's no rules, so if suddenly somebody wanted something and it was an interesting way of doing it, you know. Um, Never say never.
Yeah,
Unlikely, but I think we just need to record something else first. So
first.
maybe I'll text Trevor again tonight and say, look, let's book a date. Like 6 months from now, and then I'll finish the lyrics on the night before. It's just how it works. So
Right.
so yeah, we will. And I should pay credit to Trevor, who I'm still friends with. He still lives in Hull, and the one thing about leaving Hull is that I miss him. He was a very good friend, but we do see each other a lot. So you never know. Maybe we'll get together again.
Yeah, right. Never say never. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. All right. All right, Paul. Well, it's been very enjoyable again. Thank you for your willingness to do this. I know when we first talked, you said that you don't really do interviews anymore, but I'm glad that I grabbed you with the and to hold. Uh, and I'm
Yeah,
glad that's one of your favorite.
yeah, we
Favorite.
should explain because when you emailed me, you said
Uh,
you like Nyam Nyam and that was one of your favorite tracks.
yeah,
And I do get lots of requests for, mostly about if there's a documentary on Brian Jones or on Iggy or whatever. And the thing is, I've done that. I've
right.
said what I want to say. And with Nyam Nyam, part of me thinks, well, who would be interested anyway? But that stuff, it was a, it was a wonderful time. That is unique, where lots of people were making great music, and we, again, I feel lucky to have done that at that time. It's because we worked hard or whatever. But nonetheless, you've got to acknowledge that you can be in the right place at the right time. So
Yeah,
it's nice to think about that and think about the people with whom you worked, some of whom we miss a lot. I mean, a lot of that album's sad, and again, I kind of enjoy listening to it because I think, well, now I'm not sad any longer. I'm happy. But there are always going to be poignant moments for the people um, who were no longer with us, but we were there, and we did stuff, and we're lucky. So
yeah, yep. There you go. And I will send you a copy once I get this edited. It usually takes about a week or so.
okay,
And then we'll see what kind of reaction, what kind of comments.
great.
There you go. People from the past coming back, and you didn't realize maybe we're fans or things like that. That's always interesting. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Thanks
All
so
right.
much, Greg. Yeah, it was
All
a real
right.
pleasure. You take
Oh
care.
yeah.
Lovely talking to you.
All right. Lovely talking to you too. All the
Yeah, well,
best to you.
good
Okay.
morning to you and good night from me. Yeah, take care.
All right. Okay. We'll have fun tonight. Okay.
Will do. Thanks again. Bye.
All right. Bye bye.